Chapter 651 Weakling. Tom bent down and grabbed Blake by the neck with one hand while forming a fist with the other. Then he glared at Blake and snarled, "You guys were the ones who hit them. How dare you try to threaten them instead? I'm going to teach you a lesson you'll never forget." In an attempt to scare Tom, Blake cried out, "I'm Blake Jessup, a scion here in Turin. If you even lift a finger against me, I'll make your life a living hell." "A scion, huh? That means nothing to me," Tom retorted before throwing a punch. There was a muffled crack as Blake's nose got smashed. Blake screamed in agony as blood poured out of his nose. Tom hadn't held back at all. "How dare you punch me? I'm going to fucking kill you! My dad's Fergus Jessup, the real estate tycoon in Turin, and my maternal grandfather's Jerry Andrews. He's the king of Torrent's trusted subject," Blake declared. He was sure everyone who heard who he was would be terrified. After all, Jerry was an extremely powerful figure. Unfortunately for him, Tom didn't care much about the political scene in Dord City, and barely knew anything about Balthazar. "I despise people like you who abuse what power you have the most. I don't care who you are. I'm going to teach you a lesson today," Tom growled before punching Blake a few more times. Once again, Blake howled as the blows left him feeling like the world was spinning around him. Meanwhile, the sudden turn of events shocked Cecilia greatly, and even Miranda was stunned. When Blake's buddies heard his anguished cries, they felt terrified. They opened their eyes ever so slightly and took a peek at Blake, only to find that his face was covered in blood. He was an absolute mess. Thus, the two men continued to play dead. Neither one of them had the guts to try and save Blake. They had seen what Tom could do, and they didn't want to be on the receiving end of that. It didn't matter to them whether Blake survived Tom's beatings. As for Blake, he could barely think straight. He never thought he'd ever run into someone who had dared to attack him despite hearing that Jerry was an important political figure. "Stop! Have mercy! I made a mistake! I admit I was wrong! Please let me off the hook!" Blake begged. He didn't want to continue suffering in this manner anymore, and he knew that Tom would give him a thorough thrashing if he didn't admit his fault in the situation. "What a coward you are! I would have had some respect for you if you held on. I didn't think you'd start begging for mercy after just a few punches. But the more you beg, the more I want to beat you up," Tom snarled. Smirking, he punched Blake a few more times. Blake ended up spitting out a mouthful of blood. He felt as if every bone in his body had been broken. Tom's punches felt like boulders crashing heavily onto him. Just as Tom was getting into it, Miranda called out, "Tom, stop! You're going to kill him!" She sensed something was off when all the color drained out of Blake's face. Tom paused. He wanted to give Blake a good beating, but the latter could barely survive a few punches. If Tom continued, he could very well end up becoming a killer. "I'll let you off just this once, but I'll crush you if I ever see you attempting this stunt of yours again," Tom threatened. Then, he straightened up and walked back to Miranda. "Do you think he's dead, Tom?" Miranda asked fearfully. "No, he just fainted from the blow," Tom simply said. In reality, he wasn't sure either. Blake couldn't be such a weakling, right? "Look at him. He's covered in blood. We'd be in big trouble if he's dead," Miranda said helplessly. "I didn't even punch him that hard. How was I supposed to know that he's such a weak loser?" Tom said. "Well, you're in trouble now, Tom. I think you've just crippled a scion," Miranda exclaimed in a panic. Tom also began to realize the severity of the situation, but he didn't know how to resolve it. At that moment, Sherry regained consciousness. "Mom, you're awake." "I'm so glad," Cecilia exclaimed joyfully. "Madam Lynch!" Tom and Miranda were also glad to see that Sherry was awake. "Tom? Miranda? Why are you here?" Sherry asked the moment she saw them. "When it started raining heavily, we decided to bring some umbrellas for you two." "We didn't think you'd run into something like this," Tom explained. "Where are those men from before? Where have they gone?" Sherry asked when she saw no sign of Blake. Tom and Miranda exchanged glances. They didn't know how to explain what happened because they knew Sherry would be terrified if she found out. "Tom beat up the bad guys," Cecilia said. Sherry couldn't believe what she heard, but when she sat up she saw 3 men lying on the ground. Blake's condition was the worst. He lay motionless on the ground as the rain and his blood pooled around him. Gasping in fear, Sherry exclaimed, "Why aren't they moving? Are they dead?" "Don't worry. They're just pretending. I didn't hit them that hard," Tom assured with faked indifference. Alas, he was nervous too. He couldn't be certain that Blake was still alive. "They look very beaten up. We're in trouble now." It looked like they were driving an extremely expensive car. "They have to be one of the rich and powerful." I don't think they'll let us get away with this, Sherry said in concern. They beat you up too. I was just getting even on your behalf, Tom said. But they're powerful people that we can't afford to offend. What are we supposed to do if they come for revenge? Sherry asked. Don't worry about that, Madam Lynch. I think we should take you to the nearest hospital first, Tom suggested. I'm fine, it's just a few bruises. We need to hurry up and think of a way. Sherry didn't want to go to the hospital. That would cost money, and she didn't have much savings left. Also, she was worried that if Blake died, Tom would go to prison for killing him. You're injured all over, Madam Lynch. You need to go to the hospital right away. Don't worry about the medical bill, Tom urged. I'm fine, really. I don't need to go to the hospital. Just focus on how we can deal with this situation, Sherry said. You've got nothing to worry about, Madam Lynch. I'll deal with this, Tom assured. Let's hurry up and leave. No one else has seen you guys. You and Miranda should leave Turin, Sherry said. Shaking his head, Tom argued. We can't leave. What if they come after you? Let's all go home and discuss everything else later. Chapter 652, Bending the Truth. Let's call for an ambulance before we leave. We don't know how badly injured they are, and it's pouring right now. They'll die if they stay out here until tomorrow, Sherry said. They deserved what they got. If we get an ambulance to come here, we'll only be exposing ourselves. Who cares if a bunch of punks like them die? Tom refuted. I think Mom's right, Tom. If they die, you'll become a killer. Why don't you go to the authorities instead? They'll be more lenient on you for turning yourself in. Maybe you'll only get a light punishment, Cecilia suggested. She knew a thing or two about the law. What are you saying? They're the ones who knocked into you guys first. Everything I did was to protect you. That's called justifiable defense. They're the ones who committed a crime. Why should I turn myself in? Tom said somewhat exasperatedly. Why were they making him out to be a killer? This isn't the right place for us to talk about this. Let's just leave first, Miranda said. She knew full well just how troublesome this situation was. It would be better if they left and discussed their next move at length. Well, let's go home first then. We can take our time to discuss what we can do. Sherry agreed with a nod. Tom brought Sherry's bicycle over. Even though it got hit by a car, it was still functioning. 2 of them got into the sidecar, and all 4 of them hurried back home. Once Tom and the others were gone, Blake's 2 lackeys exhaled in relief and hastily scrambled back on their feet. Blake! They both shouted when they saw the motionless Blake. Alas, he didn't respond. Is Blake dead? One of the men, Uriah Larkin, exclaimed in a panic. That's impossible. Blake's just knocked out cold. Let's take him to the hospital now and get his injuries checked, the other man, Scott Corden, said. Why don't we call the authorities and get them to handle this? Don't they always say it's important to preserve the crime scene? Uriah suggested. Why are you being so ridiculous? Why do you want to call the authorities? Scott snapped. He never realized how much of a fool Uriah was. Why did he suggest calling the authorities? What of it? How am I being ridiculous? Uriah asked in confusion. If the authorities get here, they'll find out that Blake was driving under the influence. They'll also find out we hit someone. You sure you want the authorities to find out the truth? Scott said. Does that mean we're just going to let them get away with what they did to Blake? Uriah asked. Blake comes from a powerful background. I'm sure he can catch them, Scott said. All right then. We'll just take Blake to the hospital for a checkup, Uriah conceded. Well, don't just stand there. Help me, Scott said. The 2 men hauled Blake into the back seat of his Maybach. Apart from a broken headlight, the Maybach was fully functioning. Along the way, Scott instructed Uriah, call Mr. Jessup right away and tell him what happened to Blake. Got it. I'll do it right now, Uriah replied before making the call. Fergus had just gotten home when he received the call from Uriah. After seeing who it was, he decided to take the call. Yes? Fergus asked. I had bad news, Mr. Jessup. Someone beat up Blake and he's now unconscious, Uriah reported. What? Really? Who had the nerve to beat my son up? Fergus exclaimed in shock. We got into an accident with a mother-daughter duo. Their bicycle was banged up and one of the Maybach's headlights broke too. We wanted to get them to pay for the damages, but we got into an argument. Uriah dared not tell the whole truth. What happened next? Fergus asked. A man and a woman appeared. I think they're related to the mother-daughter duo. Anyway, the man started punching Blake. We tried our best to shield Blake, but we got knocked out too. By the time we woke up, Blake was unconscious and covered in blood, Uriah said. Fergus was outraged. What the hell? How dare they lift a finger against Blake? Blake even told them who he was and mentioned you too, But that bastard ignored him and started punching him. Uriah told a selective version of the truth. Such arrogance. That punk's got a death wish. Fergus was even more furious. That's right. How dare he disregard you? He's far too arrogant, Uriah agreed. Hang on. Didn't you say you got knocked out? How do you know what they said then? Fergus asked in puzzlement. Uriah froze. He'd be screwed if Fergus found out he only pretended to be unconscious. I was just barely conscious. I couldn't move, but I could still hear what was happening around me, Uriah explained. Who's the guy who hit Blake? Where is he now? Fergus questioned. They fled. I don't know where they are, Uriah said. You know what he looks like, right? Fergus checked. Of course, I'll definitely be able to recognize him if I see him again, Uriah replied. That'll do. As long as I know what he looks like, I'll be able to locate him. Are Blake's injuries serious? Fergus asked concernedly. Blake is still unconscious. Scott and I are taking him to the hospital right now. Please come over, Mr. Jessup, Uriah said. I got it. I'm heading over right now, Fergus said before ending the call. Lacey Andrews, Fergus's wife, asked, What's going on, dear? Someone just beat Blake up, Fergus said with a long exhale. What? What happened? Who had the nerve to do a thing like that? Lacey asked. We don't know who did it yet, but Uriah said he knows what the guy looks like. I'll definitely find a way to find that bastard, Fergus growled. We must find him and teach him a lesson he'll never forget. But how's Blake doing? Lacey asked. He's unconscious. Uriah and Scott are taking him to the hospital. Let's head over now, Fergus said. He had his driver take him and Lacey to the hospital. Meanwhile, Tom and the others got back to Sherry's place. Throughout the ride, Sherry felt a sense of dread, as if something bad was about to happen. I've got a bad feeling, Tom. You and Miranda need to leave Turin at once, Sherry said. Chapter 653, A Friend in Higher Places. Madam Lynch, I'm the one who beat those men up. If I leave, they'll come after you and Cecilia, so there's no way I'm leaving now, Tom firmly declared. Don't worry about us, just hurry up and leave. If you waste any more time, it'll be too late, Sherry urged anxiously. Madam Lynch, why don't you two leave Turin with us? Miranda asked. She didn't want to leave Sherry and Cecilia behind. We've lived here for so long now. There's nowhere else we can go? Sherry said. Tom and I came from South Lake City. Now that our soldiers have taken back the city, why don't you head there with us? Miranda suggested. The moment Sherry heard the name South Lake City, she felt mixed feelings. Memories of the past flooded her mind. Noticing Sherry's silence, Miranda continued, Come with us. My boss back in South Lake City is a very warm-hearted person. I'm sure she'll arrange accommodation for you. I have some assets there too, so I can help you. Here in Turin she was penniless, but that wouldn't be the same when she got back to South Lake City. She had been the vice president of South Lake Corporation for several years now, and had a sizable net worth. Plus, Miranda was sure that once Willow heard about Sherry and Cecilia's situation, she would help them too. That's right. Willow's very kind and she owns a major corporation. She can help you get a job and settle down in South Lake City, Tom added. Even if Willow refused to help, Tom himself could lend Sherry and Cecilia a hand. What are you thinking about, Madam Lynch? Is something holding you back? Miranda asked when she saw the faraway look in Sherry's eyes. IL won't be joining you, Sherry said as she came back to reality. Why not? Is it because you can't bear to leave Turin? Miranda asked. Cecilia's in her last year in high school. This is a crucial year for her. Her studies will be greatly affected if she leaves Turin. Let's wait until she finishes her studies first, Sherry said. Then, we're not leaving either. I'm going to stay here until the matter's resolved, Tom declared. Tom, that scion said he's the son of Turin's real estate tycoon, and he also said his maternal grandfather is one of the king's most trusted subjects. We won't be able to go up against someone like him, Cecilia said concernedly. After hearing that, Sherry's expression froze. What? Is that true? Yes, I heard him clearly. He said his maternal grandfather is a powerful politician working for the king. Cecilia nodded emphatically. That makes matters worse. There's no way they'll let this slide. Sherry was terrified. Don't worry. So what if he's a powerful politician? We're living in a civilized society. The law comes before everything, Tom said. You're being too naive. Our society has always had a dark side to it, and connections are everything. People like us with no money and power have no say at all, Sherry refuted. Relax, Madam Lynch. I know a friend in high places too, Tom said with a laugh. He knew that Miranda's boss, Willow, had an extraordinary identity. Her husband was Caspian, the Diaturanian god of war. Why would someone like him be scared of a so-called powerful politician? Stop trying to fool us. How can you know someone powerful? Even if you come from a good background, you can't be more powerful than them. Sherry continued to fret. She could tell from Blake's arrogance that he had to come from an extremely powerful background. I can't tell you his identity yet, Madam Lynch, but when the time is right, I'll let you know. I'm not lying, right, Miranda? Tom said. Miranda nodded. She figured out that Tom was referring to Caspian. Caspian was Miranda's boss, but she and Willow were good friends. Caspian would surely help them if he knew they were in trouble. Alas, never would Tom have imagined that Sherry was Caspian's biological mother. Oh fine, do as you wish, but I'm warning you. The political scene is extremely complex. Even if you know someone, they might not help you, Sherry said. She was once married to Logan, so she was familiar with the politics of Diatoran. The people at the top often plotted against each other, and their relationships were quite complicated. No matter what happens, Madam Lynch, I'll deal with this before I leave, Tom said. Okay. I trust you, Sherry said with a sigh. Since Tom was determined to stay, she couldn't possibly kick him out. In any case, she admired his courage. As Sherry looked at Tom, she was suddenly reminded of her son. On a stormy night 20 years ago, the Macys encountered an unexpected incident. In the chaos, Logan ended up losing their baby son. In a fit of rage, Sherry left the Macys. She figured her son had to have grown up to become a fine young man too. Thanks, Madam Lynch. Your injuries are quite serious. Why don't I take you to the hospital? Tom asked once again. No need. It's just a few scratches and bruises. I'll be fine, Sherry said. Uriah and Scott brought Blake to Churin Hospital. A little over 10 minutes later, Fergus, Lacey, and a bunch of their subordinates arrived as well. The couple was furious when they saw how badly injured Blake was. The moment the doctors saw Fergus, they immediately did their best to treat Blake. Everyone waited agitatedly outside the operating theater. Uriah and Scott gave a summary of the night's events, though they made sure to exaggerate certain things and omit the truth. They even turned Tom into a ruthless and arrogant punk who had no respect for Fergus at all. As expected, Fergus and Lacey were enraged. That bastard, he's got a death wish. Does he know who my father is? I'm sending him to prison, Lacey growled.
Don't worry, dear. I'll find him,
Fergus snarled. Just then, a doctor came out of the operating theater. How's my son, doctor? Lacey immediately asked. The young Mr. Jessup's condition has been stabilized, but his nose is broken, and some of his organs have been injured as well. Also, due to the injuries sustained in his right eye, he developed a blood clot there, and I'm afraid he might lose his vision, the doctor reported. All the blood drained out of Fergus's and Lacey's faces. Please, doctor, you must treat my son's eyes. We'll spare any expense to treat him, Lacey pleaded. Money isn't the issue here. The young Mr. Jessup's eye tissue has been severely damaged. I do apologize, but we can't do anything about it, the doctor said sympathetically. Chapter 654, A Vicious Idea. I'm sure you have a way to save him. The medical field has advanced so much. I'm sure you can treat Blake's eyes, Lacey insisted. There's one option, an eye transplant. But I don't think anyone's willing to donate their eyes, the doctor said. Upon hearing that, a vicious thought brewed in Lacey's mind. Once the doctor left, Uriah said, Blake has suffered so much. We need to inform the authorities at once and get them to catch that punk. No need. We'll handle this ourselves, Lacey said. She wouldn't be able to carry out the idea she just had if the authorities got involved. What are you going to do, Mrs. Jessup? Uriah asked curiously. That has nothing to do with you, Lacey retorted icily. She had no reason to explain her idea to a lackey. Come with me, Fergus, Lacey said. Coming. All along, Fergus obeyed Lacey's every word because her father, Jerry, was a high-ranking politician and one of the king's most trusted subjects. Once they walked to a quiet corner, he asked, What is it, dear? The doctor said Blake might be losing vision in one eye. Have you thought about what we can do to stop that? Lacey asked. Instead of informing him of her plan right away, she decided to ask him for his opinion first. Even the doctor said we don't have any options available. So, how should I know what we can do? I've heard of people donating their corneas but not their eyes, Fergus said. You're such an idiot. We can just gouge out someone's eyeballs, Lacey declared venomously. What did you say? Fergus was flabbergasted. What's with your reaction? Blake's a prince among men. We can't let him go blind. We must find a suitable donor for him at all costs, Lacey said. You're right, dear. Blake's our precious son. Everyone would surely judge him if he goes blind in one eye, Fergus said. That's right. I guess you're not completely hopeless after all. We can't let our family become a laughingstock. That'll only humiliate my father, Lacey said with a nod. Do you have a plan, dear? Do you know where we can find a suitable eye donor? Fergus asked. Hadn't Uriah and Scott told us everything we needed to know? We can just get an eyeball from that bastard who beat up Blake. When the time comes, we'll just hire a surgeon to perform the surgery in private, Lacey declared. Fergus's expression lit up. Smiling, he exclaimed, You're so smart, dear. Why didn't I think of that? Since that bastard injured Blake, it's only right that we make him pay. That's right. By doing this, we'll not only avenge Blake, but we'll also make sure he recovers and gets to be a normal person. However, we have to get a private surgeon for this. The hospitals won't help us with this surgery, Lacey said. Sure. We'll do as you say, dear. How should we deal with those people? Fergus asked. We should kill them, of course. Don't tell me you think we should keep them around, Lacey said with a scoff. She spoke of killing a few people as if it were nothing. Are you sure we should do that? Won't it cause trouble for us? We're talking about a few lives here, Fergus said in concern. How is it going to cause trouble for us? Don't forget who my father is. He's a high-ranking politician. Even though he's not one of the most powerful people in Diatoran, it's still a piece of cake for him to get rid of a few ordinary citizens, Lacey declared. All right then. With him backing us up, we have nothing to be afraid of, Fergus agreed. He had become the real estate tycoon in Turin, thanks to Jerry's help. Most people knew Jerry was his father-in-law, so naturally, they tried to curry favor with him by giving him all the best land in the area. We can't let the authorities find out about this. We'll deal with it ourselves. Got it! I'll have my men start looking for those bastards, Fergus said. Yes, do that. Find them as quickly as possible, Lacey instructed. Fergus nodded and walked over to his subordinates. Look into this matter. Find out who did this to Blake, and do whatever it takes to find him, Fergus commanded. Understood, his men replied before heading off to do as told. Caspian was still at Riverside Villa. Ever since he found out about his biological family, he became extremely agitated. He had previously met his biological father, Logan, back at West Eredlands. When he knew that his biological mother was still alive as well, he became even more excited. He kept calling Lena to ask about Sherry's whereabouts. Even now, he couldn't resist calling Lena again. Did you need something, Lord Caspian? Lena asked helplessly. It was his 30th time calling her today, and her patience was worn thin. I just wanted to know how the investigations are coming along, Caspian said. He also realized he was being a bit much. I've already assigned people to look into this matter, Lord Caspian, but this process takes time. We can't rush it, Lena said. What's taking so long? It's been half a day already and you haven't found anything, Caspian said. Lord Caspian, the only thing we know is her name. You're asking us to search the entire Diatoran for her. That's like looking for a needle in a haystack, Lena exclaimed. Have more people join in on the search. I'll give you 5 days, Caspian instructed. Sir, I know you can't wait to meet your mother, but 5 days is too little time. Honestly, we're relying on nothing but luck to find her. We might locate her tomorrow if we're lucky enough. If not, it might even take more than a year, Lena argued. Fine. Carry on. Tell me as soon as you find something, Caspian said. Rest assured, sir. I'll report to you the moment I have news. You don't need to keep calling me, Lena said. Caspian glanced at Willow before adding, By the way, don't forget about Willow's biological mother. You need to locate her as soon as possible, too. Yes, I got it, Lena replied, hiding the fact that she was feeling rather exasperated. Caspian was getting on her nerves, but she didn't voice that aloud, of course. After ending the call, Caspian commented unhappily, Task Force Rose's team members aren't very good at their jobs. It's been hours, and they haven't got a single lead yet. Don't be so impatient, hubby. Let's just wait for news. With how many people there are in Diatoran, it's not easy for them to find someone with just a name. Give them a bit more time, Willow consoled. Chapter 655, Keeping a Close Watch. I know, I'm just rushing them on purpose so they'll stay focused and be more efficient, Caspian said. Well, you're Lord Caspian. Since you've given the order, I'm sure they won't slack off. You don't need to keep calling Lena every few minutes. You're only making her more stressed, Willow chided. Caspian nodded in agreement. Back at Turin, Fergus and Lacey were still at the hospital. It was 10:00 p.m. when Blake finally regained consciousness. Mom. Dad. Why can't I see anything out of my right eye? Am I a disabled person now? I don't want to live anymore, Blake wailed. Don't worry, Blake, we'll find a way to treat your eye, Lacey promised. But the doctor already said that my eye is too damaged. I can't regain my vision, Blake wailed again. There's one way to treat you. We just need to get you an eyeball transplant. Don't worry about this. We'll find a donor for you, Lacey assured. She wasn't going to tell Blake the truth, of course. Stop trying to lie to me, Mom. Who'd donate an eyeball? Plus, it has to come from a living donor, Blake said. You have nothing to worry about, Blake. Your father and I will find a way. Your father has already instructed his people to find the guy who attacked you, Lacey said. That's easy, Dad. There are surveillance cameras everywhere, aren't there? You just have to check the footage, Blake said. That's right. I've gotten people to start looking. I'm sure we'll be receiving the news soon enough, Fergus said. There was a high schooler too. She was wearing a school uniform. I'm sure you can get to him by tracking her down, Blake added. Don't worry, Blake. I'll deal with this. Now, tell me the truth. Why did that guy beat you up? Fergus asked. He had a feeling Uriah didn't tell the whole truth. Blake answered, Uriah, Scott, and I went to the farmhouse to hang out. We had a few drinks there. When we were driving back, the storm got too heavy so I couldn't see clearly. We ended up crashing into this mother-daughter duo. One of the headlights on my Maybach was damaged. So I wanted them to pay for it, but they said they didn't have any money, so I got Uriah and Scott to beat them up. You were driving under the influence? Fergus exclaimed in shock. I only drank a little bit. I didn't think I'd run into someone. They were riding a sorry-ass bicycle. I couldn't see them, Blake explained helplessly. You're right. These peasants riding around on bicycles are such an eyesore. They're ruining our city's image, Fergus said. Well, my Maybach got damaged too, so isn't it normal that I give them a good beating to vent my anger? Blake continued. Yes, of course. Since they couldn't pay you, they deserve to be taught a lesson, Fergus agreed. What happened after that? Lacey asked. Well, some bastard came rushing up to us and started beating all three of us up. Naturally, Blake didn't tell the truth. He couldn't possibly say that he only got beaten up because he had tried to rape Cecilia. That bastard, what a lowlife, Lacey fumed. That's right. He even said he didn't care that you're the real estate tycoon, Dad, Blake added. What an arrogant bastard. I'll be humiliated if I don't put him in his place, Fergus growled. Just then, a few men came rushing in. We found them, Mr. Jessup, one of the men reported. Good. All we need to know is their location. Who's the guy? Fergus asked. His name is Tom Forrest, and he seems to have come from South Lake City. He's just an ordinary person. He has a woman with her, Miranda Barton. He's been trying to woo her. They both fled to Turin, so the woman with the bicycle took them in. The woman's name is Sherry Lynch. She has a daughter named Cecilia Lynch, who's studying at Turin High. Sherry rents some farmland where she grows her own fruits and vegetables. She sells them at a market in the city, the man reported. What an impudent fool he is, Fergus growled through gritted teeth. It's child's play for us to deal with a bunch of peasants like them. No one will care about them. Where are they staying? Lacey asked. They're staying in the suburban area on the northern outskirts of the city. We have their address, the subordinate replied. Good job. You found their location so quickly, Lacey praised with a smile. Should we go and get them now, Mrs. Jessup? The man asked. There's no rush. Just keep an eye on them first. Make sure they don't escape, Lacey instructed. She had things to prepare beforehand. Before capturing Tom and the others, she needed to find a surgeon she could trust. That way, Blake could get the surgery done to treat his right eye. Now was not the right time yet, so it wouldn't be wise to catch them. Understood, Mrs. Jessup. Rest assured. We'll keep a close watch on them, the man declared. Get on with it then, Lacey said. Once the men left, Lacey turned to Fergus. Dear, we need to find a good surgeon right away. One who can perform Blake's surgery. I'm on it, Fergus replied. Meanwhile, at a shabby house in the suburban area on the northern outskirts of the city, Miranda and Cecilia were tending to Sherry's injuries. Tom remained alert as he stood guard at the door, afraid that someone might come hunting them down to get revenge. The rain had stopped, but the night sky was dark as ever. None of them knew that a major crisis was upon them. It's getting late, Tom. You should get some rest, Cecilia said as she went up to him. I'm not sleepy yet. You guys go ahead, Tom said. He had an unsettling feeling. Blake came from a powerful background, so Tom knew the former wouldn't be dropping this matter. Sooner or later, someone would be coming after them, and Tom wanted to be prepared for it. Tom, are you worried that someone will come after us? Cecilia asked. That's right. It's better if we keep our guard up, Tom answered with a nod. I still think it's best if you two leave Churin right away. That way, you won't have to live in constant fear, Cecilia suggested. We'll leave once I settle this issue, Tom responded firmly. If you leave now, we can find a way to save ourselves even if they come after us. After all, you're the one who hit Blake. They can't do anything to Mom and me, Cecilia said. You're being too naive, Cecilia. People like them won't stop at anything. They'll surely find a way to force me to show myself, Tom said. Chapter 656 All prepared. None of this would have happened if it hadn't been for us, Cecilia said remorsefully. It has nothing to do with you. It was that punk's fault. He's the one who drove while drunk and crashed into you. He even tried to twist things around. He's despicable, Tom declared. Well, people like us who are poor or powerless always get bullied. I just hope things can get settled as quickly as possible, Cecilia said worriedly. Don't worry, everything will be fine. Go to sleep. You have class tomorrow, don't you? Tom reminded. Yeah, thanks. Cecilia nodded and went to her room. Tom stayed by the door for a little longer, but since everything seemed normal, he eventually went to his room as well. Over at Churin Hospital, Fergus told Lacey, Dear, I finally hired us an extremely capable surgeon. Excellent. How long will it take him to get there? Lacey asked. He's rushing over as we speak, but he'll only arrive tomorrow night at the earliest, Fergus replied. Fine. We won't do anything today then. We'll go after them tomorrow, Lacey said. We can't let anyone find out about the eye transplant. Where should we go? Fergus asked. Why don't we head to that abandoned factory in the north? It's a remote area with no one around. We can gouge out their eyeballs and bury them alive there. It'll save us a ton of trouble, Lacey said. That's settled then. I'll arrange for more people to patrol the area, Fergus said. Definitely. No one must find out what we're doing. After all, it won't reflect well on us. Even if my father wanted to smooth things over for us, it would be quite difficult for him, Lacey said. While Jerry was indeed a powerful politician, there were still things he couldn't bury under the rug. I know. Don't worry, no one except for us, Blake, and the surgeon will know. About this, Fergus declared confidently. Caspian called Lena once more, but unsurprisingly she had no new update for him. Sylvia was busy overseeing the construction of the martyrs' memorial plaque, and Desmond was handling the martyrs' remains. A grand remembrance ceremony was going to be held at Southlake Square tomorrow. After thinking it over, Balthazar had decided to take Caspian's advice. He was planning on remembering the souls of the fallen heroes before rewarding the surviving soldiers for their valiance and heroic acts. The news regarding the remembrance ceremony spread all across Southlake City. Everyone in the city knew about it, and even the entire nation of Diatoran had their eyes on the event. Caspian had driven off both Robert and Victor, as well as their armies. Thanks to that, the people of Southlake City no longer doubted him. The citizens who had fled during the fight also returned to their homes. Many had been injured during the battle at Southlake City. Avon was stuck at the hospital, doing his best to treat the patients. Rubble and ruins could be found in all corners of Southlake City. Soon it would be time to start rebuilding the city. Back at Churin, Fergus and Lacey were at home. Dear, the surgeon and his assistant have arrived in Churin, Fergus informed Lacey. Good. Arrange accommodations for them. We'll strike at midnight, Lacey said. Why wait till midnight? Fergus asked. Because that's the quietest hour. We can do whatever we want without having to worry about being seen, Lacey said. Got it. I'll make the arrangements right away, Fergus replied. Over at Sherry's house, Miranda voiced her doubts. Something doesn't feel right to me. We'd injured the son of Churin's real estate tycoon so badly. It's only natural if Fergus tries to avenge Blake, but there hasn't been any sign of them so far. I have a feeling that something terrible is about to happen. I've been feeling uneasy the whole time, Sherry said. Don't worry, Mom. Maybe they're too afraid to come after us because they know he was in the wrong, Cecilia suggested. There's no way people like them would be scared of coming after us. I have a bad feeling about this. Sherry was still worried. Don't worry, Madam Lynch. I'll resolve this matter for you, Tom assured. That's right, Tom's a martial arts expert. He can even go up against dozens of men by himself. You don't have to worry about a thing today. Just relax and get some rest, Miranda comforted them. What? Is Tom such a good fighter? Sherry exclaimed. He is, Miranda affirmed with a nod. Fergus isn't just a wealthy man, he's also extremely powerful. No matter how strong Tom is, he can't go up against Fergus, Sherry said. There's no use in worrying about this now, Madam Lynch. We'll cross that bridge when we come to it. Where there's a will, there's always a way, Tom declared.
Oh, right.
Sherry replied somewhat helplessly. Tom continued to stand guard at the house today, but he was more nervous than yesterday. Soon, it was midnight. The surgeon and his assistant had gotten everything ready at the abandoned factory north of the city. The factory compound was surrounded by the Jessup's bodyguards, over 400 of them. Meanwhile, over 60% of their bodyguards were rushing over to Sherry's house. Fergus figured that several dozen men would be enough to handle a guy like Tom, so he didn't feel the need to dispatch more men. He didn't think Tom could take on over 60 men alone. Tom stood outside the house until midnight. Since he didn't see anything out of the ordinary, he decided to go to sleep. He had been awake for nearly 2 days now, and his body was exhausted. In less than 2 minutes he fell asleep. At 1:00 a.m., Sherry, Miranda, and Cecilia were woken up by the commotion outside. Tom was too soundly asleep to hear it. Almost 30 cars stopped outside Sherry's house, and soon, there was the sound of hurried footsteps. Sherry and the other women knew that something was up. They quickly got dressed and went to take a look. Miranda even brought a kitchen knife with her. When they opened the front door, they saw a crowd of men surrounding the house. All 3 women were scared stiff. As predicted, Blake and his family were coming after them. The armed men were staring at them with fearsome expressions. Cecilia had never seen something like this before. She jumped in fright and cowered behind the other 2. "Who are you? Why are you here?" Sherry asked fearfully. "Stop pretending. The young Mr. Jessup is still lying in the hospital right now. You're coming with us," the man standing in front declared. He was Calum Knox, the man in charge of the hunt for Tom and the others. Chapter 657 Callers at Midnight. Calum wanted to avoid unnecessary violence too. He'd preferred it if the women complied with his demand. "No, we're not going anywhere," Sherry staunchly declared. She knew nothing good was going to happen if they left with these men. "There are over 60 of us here. None of you are getting away. Don't force me to get physical with you, or else you're going to be in a world of pain," Calum threatened. "I'll come with you, but let the rest of them stay here, okay? This has nothing to do with them," Sherry pleaded. She knew she wasn't getting out of this, but she wanted to try to save Cecilia, Miranda, and Tom from sharing her fate. "No, Mom, you can't leave with them," Cecilia cried out frantically as she clutched Sherry's arm with a panicked expression. "None of you are getting out of this. You're all coming with me, including that bastard who hit the young Mr. Jessup," Calum declared. It was only then that the women realized Tom wasn't with them. Sherry and Cecilia both silently grumbled in their hearts. Tom kept saying he would resolve this matter for them, but now that these men had come knocking, he didn't even have the guts to confront them. Was he a coward? They didn't know that Tom was exhausted from his lack of sleep and didn't hear the commotion. Meanwhile, Calum didn't bother wasting his breath any longer. He signaled to his men and instructed, "Throw them into the car." Nearly 20 burly men immediately stormed over. The others remained still. They didn't need to get involved. The other men could easily handle 3 women by themselves. Sherry and Cecilia instinctively stumbled backward when they saw the men charging over. Sherry was terrified, but she stood in front of Cecilia anyway. "Don't come any nearer. I'll kill anyone who does," Miranda shouted as she waved the knife in front of her. The men began to cackle among themselves. Miranda looked fierce, but these fighters didn't care. They could see her trembling uncontrollably. These men were hardened criminals who'd seen all kinds of people before, so why would they be afraid of Miranda? Even though Miranda had a knife with her, she felt terrified. She didn't think she could defend them against so many burly men. "You must be kidding me. Put that knife away. Don't hurt yourself," one of the men said to Miranda. However, Miranda didn't back down. She remained in her spot and shouted, "Stay away or I'll attack you." Sherry and Cecilia admired her bravery. "Sure, do it if you dare," one of the men holding a metal bat said with a chortle. Just then, a husky voice rang out. "How could I possibly let a beautiful lady like you do a thing like that, Miranda? Let me handle them." Miranda turned around and saw Tom. Sherry and Cecilia were also looking at him. At last, the women exhaled in relief. Tom was dressed in a t-shirt that exposed his muscular physique. "What took you so long, Tom?" Miranda grumbled. "I haven't been getting enough sleep the last 2 days, so I slept a bit too soundly just now." "Sorry about that. I'll deal with these punks," Tom declared. Tom had been fast asleep when he suddenly sensed danger and dashed out. He'd been in such a rush that he didn't even pull on a jacket. "You can have this," Miranda said while passing the knife to Tom. "I don't need a knife to deal with punks like them. All I need are my bare hands," Tom said while eyeing the men in front of him. He figured there were over 60 of them, and he could easily take them down without even breaking a sweat. Thus, it would be better if he didn't use a weapon. He didn't want to accidentally kill them during the fight. Caleb's expression hardened. There were over 60 of them here today, but the arrogant bastard was claiming he could beat them all with just his bare hands. "Get him! Break his limbs and seize all of them!" Caleb commanded without wasting any more time. Fergus and the surgeon were waiting for them. They needed to catch these people and take them back as soon as possible. The men swiftly came at Tom, but the latter sent the first man flying with a forceful kick. Howling in pain, the man fell to the ground and coughed up some blood. Sherry and Cecilia were stunned. Neither one expected him to be such a good fighter. It seemed like he could indeed walk the talk. The man who got kicked had stumbled into the people behind him, taking over a dozen of them to fall to the ground with him. Caleb was taken aback when he saw how strong Tom was. It explained why Tom made such an arrogant statement earlier. He did know how to fight after all. Nevertheless, Caleb didn't consider Tom a threat. He was a Tier 3 expert himself, and most people were no match against him. He thought of Tom as nothing more than a brute with a bit of strength. "Go on! Don't stop! Beat him up!" Caleb commanded. His men had also been stunned by the scene, but they regained their senses and rushed at Tom with their weapons in hand. Tom roared and rushed at them as well. With great speed and agility, he punched the men down one by one. He was able to target their vital points with such precision that all of them fell before they could retaliate. In less than 3 minutes, Tom defeated 20 men. Sherry and Cecilia were stupefied. They were amazed by how strong Tom was. He'd easily defeated 20 men by himself. They finally understood why he said he could resolve this matter for them. He was indeed an expert fighter. Miranda was aware of Tom's abilities, so she wasn't worried that something might happen to him. She'd already witnessed what he could do when he saved her previously. Still, even though her impression of Tom had changed, she didn't have any romantic feelings for him, though she found him more favorable now. Alas, after seeing someone as wonderful as Caspian, Miranda thought all other men paled in comparison. Meanwhile, the other men froze when they saw how easily Tom managed to take down 20% of their comrades. Caleb was also thunderstruck, but he still had about 40 men with him. He figured that was enough to subdue Tom. "Why are you guys just standing there? Get him!" Caleb ordered angrily. Chapter 658 Shadowless Kick. Even though Caleb's men were scared of Tom's strength, they charged forward to gang rip on him anyway. Sherry and Cecilia grew anxious. Despite Tom's jaw-dropping display earlier, he was now up against 40 men. They were worried he couldn't hold his own against them. The two women were terrified. Their fate rested in Tom's hands. Naturally, the men dared not let their guards down. They now knew Tom was no ordinary fighter. One false move and they would all go down. No matter how strong Tom was, it was still challenging for him to go up against a crowd of 40 men who were surrounding him. Expression darkening. Tom wasted no time. He balled his fists and punched the first 2 men who came at him. Then, he grabbed the metal bats from them and started attacking the others. Low thuds mixed with agonized cries rang out all around. Still holding the knife, Miranda wanted to help, but she didn't join the fight. She knew she wouldn't be of any help and might even end up distracting Tom if she needed him to rescue her. Thus, it was better for her to stay put. Soon, 20 of the 40 men had been defeated. Sherry and Cecilia were stunned and delighted to find that even 40 men couldn't stop Tom. Meanwhile, Caleb also noticed that things were going south. He finally realized he had underestimated Tom. If this continued, all of his men would be utterly defeated. Still, Caleb didn't rush things. He bided his time and waited for the right opportunity to deal a crushing blow on Tom. He could tell that even he might not be able to defeat Tom if they fought head-on. When Caleb saw Tom was engaged in a fight with some of his men, he swiftly charged forward and launched a kick at him. Caleb was a Tier 3 expert. While that was enough to handle an ordinary fighter, he could tell that Tom wasn't any less powerful than he was. Thus, he relied on his ultimate move, the Thunderbolt kick. Caleb was confident he could take Tom down with it. Tom noticed Caleb's attack, but he leaped forward without panicking. He couldn't believe Caleb was trying to take him down with a kick. What a joke! Tom learned martial arts from an eternal grandmaster who was an expert in attacks involving the legs, and he picked up a few tricks too. One of the moves he learned was called the Shadowless Kick. It involved kicking so quickly that the enemy couldn't even see the attack. Tom decided to let Caleb get a taste of his strength. Caleb's Thunderbolt kick was no slouch, of course. The attack was terrifying enough to make a person quake in fear. However, Tom wasn't afraid as he aimed a kick at Caleb as well. The fighters working for the Jessups knew just how powerful Caleb was. No one ever managed to defeat him once he brought out the thunderbolt kick. They couldn't believe Tom was going to fight Caleb head-on. In fact, they were sure he was going to be crippled by the kick. In an instant, the two men clashed in the air with a forceful blow, stirring the wind around them. Everyone had a hard time keeping their eyes open. The crisp sound of bones breaking was followed by an anguished howl, and Caleb went flying backward as if he had been shot out of a cannon. His right leg was completely shattered, and he crumpled to the ground, looking like a pathetic mess. Caleb's men were horrified. They couldn't believe that Caleb had been defeated. In all their years of working under him, it was their first time seeing him in such a state. Even Caleb was powerless against this nobody. None of them would have believed this if they hadn't witnessed it with their own eyes. Sherry and Cecilia were dumbstruck too. At last they realized just how much they had underestimated Tom. Caleb's right leg was completely broken, but Tom didn't leave things at that. He walked up to Caleb and stomped on the latter's chest. He didn't want to waste any more of his time. Once he dealt with Caleb, the latter's men would scatter like headless chickens. Feeling like a boulder was crushing his chest, Caleb immediately sputtered and spat out a mouthful of blood. He was ghostly pale, and the bones in his right leg were visible. The horrifying sight scared Sherry and Cecilia. "Caleb, are you all right?" Caleb's men cried out, but none of them dared to approach after seeing how devastating of a defeat he had suffered. "Tell Blake's dad that if he comes after us again, I'll knock his teeth out," Tom growled. "Yes, certainly. I won't leave a single word out. Please stop stepping on me. You're going to kill me," Caleb begged between gasps. He felt as if he would suffocate any second now. Tom took his foot off. He didn't want to kill Caleb. Caleb exhaled in relief. He just had a taste of what it felt like to be on the verge of dying. "Get out of here, all of you! Don't disturb our rest!" Tom snapped. He didn't want to kill them, so he had to chase them off. The men exchanged glances. None of them dared to move. Tom was too strong. Afraid that he would attack them too, they didn't even dare to come over and help Caleb. "I'm giving you 5 minutes. I'll break your limbs if you don't get lost before then." Tom growled impatiently. He knew they were scared of him. The men immediately scampered off, taking Caleb with them. Soon, the cars disappeared into the night. Meanwhile, Sherry and Cecilia were still in shock. They weren't sure what just happened. It all felt like a dream. Tom had defeated over 60 men by himself. They wouldn't have thought this to be possible if they hadn't seen it for themselves. "Go back to sleep, Madam Lynch. Everything's fine now," Tom said. His words snapped the mother-daughter duo out of their daze, but of course, neither one could sleep now. They'd just been through a terrifying ordeal. "Tom, I think things have gotten even more troublesome now," Sherry said worriedly. "They're just bullies, Madam Lynch. There's nothing to be afraid of." Tom brushed her off. "The Jessups are extremely powerful in Turin. They can do anything they want here. Even though you defeated these men, the Jessups won't stop coming after us," Sherry said. Chapter 659. A troubling situation. "Don't worry. If they have the nerve to show up again, I'll send them packing one more time," Tom declared. "Tom, you don't know anything about the Jessups. It's said that they have a lot of powerful martial arts experts, and it's very likely that they have access to guns too. I know you're a good fighter, but no matter how strong you are, the bullets will still harm you," Sherry said. Tom frowned. While he was a good fighter, he couldn't do anything when guns were involved. After all, he was made of flesh and bone. He would have to become far more powerful before he could claim he wasn't worried about a gunfight. "What should we do now then, Madam Lynch?" Tom asked. He dared not take things too lightly anymore. If the enemy came bearing guns, he couldn't do a thing against them. "You need to hurry up and leave Turin. That's the only option," Sherry said. "Miranda and I are perfectly willing to leave if they come after us, but what about you two, Madam Lynch? Surely they'll come after you guys too." "It's best if we all leave Turin together," Tom suggested. "I don't mind leaving, but what about Cece? She's in her senior year. It's a crucial time for her," Sherry said. Cecilia was finishing up her last year in high school, so Sherry didn't want anything to jeopardize Cecilia's academics. "Staying alive is more important, Madam Lynch. I know some people in South Lake City. We can get Cecilia enrolled in a new school," Tom said. Sherry was still hesitant. "Let's just do as Tom says, Mom. We can leave Turin first and come back once the matter blows over. If not, we can always settle down in South Lake City too," Cecilia urged. "All right, let's pack up and leave right away," Sherry agreed. She knew things would only get more dangerous if they waited any longer, so she decided to leave with Tom and Miranda. Don't worry, Madam Lynch. Once we get to South Lake City, I'll arrange a house for you, and we'll ask Willow for help to find Cecilia a school, Miranda said. Willow? Who's that? Sherry asked. She's my boss, the CEO of South Lake Corporation, Miranda explained. We don't have time to chat. Quick, let's pack our things and leave, Tom urged. Okay, Sherry nodded. The four of them quickly packed their belongings. Tom and Miranda didn't have much, so they were done in next to no time. Sherry and Cecilia had little that was important to them too, so they only packed some clothes. By the time they finished packing up, it was 2:00 a.m. and they wanted to leave Turin at once. Unfortunately, there was no way out of Turin in the middle of the night, so they decided to spend the night at the station first. They figured it would be safer for them at the station, and they could catch the earliest bus to South Lake City in the morning. Meanwhile, at the abandoned factory north of the city, the surgeon the Jessups hired was getting impatient. It's 2:00 a.m., Mr. Jessup. Where's the donor? When are you bringing him over? Kent Vega asked in annoyance. Fergus had offered him over $1 million to do the surgery. Please wait a little longer, Mr. Vega. They should be here soon, Fergus said a little sheepishly. Oh, all right, Kent replied exasperatedly. He had already taken Fergus's money after all. 15 more minutes passed, and there was still no sign of the eye donor. It's already past 2:00 a.m. What is Calum doing? Hasn't he caught them yet? Fergus grumbled. He was getting antsy too. That's impossible. It's been so long. I'm sure Calum managed to defeat them. Are you telling me that over 60 men couldn't capture 4 people? Lacey replied. You're right. Calum is a tier 3 expert. I'm sure he can catch them, Fergus termly declared. Maybe something went wrong, Lacey said. Calum has been working for me for many years now, and he has never failed a mission. I'm sure everything's fine, Fergus said. But it's already past 2:00 a.m. How much longer must we wait? Lacey was agitated. I don't know what's taking them so long either, Fergus responded helplessly. He was anxious too, but there was nothing he could do. Well, call them and ask then. Why did I marry an idiot like you? Lacey grew irritated. Right, I'll call them. Fergus immediately made the call. Just then, they heard the sound of cars approaching the factory. Dear, that must be Calum and the others. They're back! Fergus exclaimed happily as he put his phone away. He saw the cars driving toward the factory. Good! Since they're here, we can start the eye transplant soon. Lacey was thrilled. She turned to Kent and asked, The donor's here, Mr. Vega. Have you prepared everything? Yes, everything's ready. I'll gouge out their eyes first, Kent said with a smile. The bodyguards outside the factory saw who had come, so they didn't stop the cars. Once the cars came to a stop, Calum and his men shuffled out, looking like sorry messes. Fergus and Lacey were puzzled to see how disheveled the men were. They also started to panic. Did Calum and his men fail? Despite there being over 60 of them, they still failed to capture 4 people. The couple kept waiting eagerly to see Sherry and the others being hauled out, but alas, the only person they saw being hauled out of the car was Calum, who had a broken leg. Fergus and Lacey were stupefied. What on earth happened? Soon, Calum was brought to Fergus. What happened, Calum? Why are you in this wretched state? Fergus exclaimed in shock when he saw Calum's bloody leg. Did you bring them over, Calum? Lacey asked. She only cared about the results. The process didn't matter to her. He's too strong, Mr. Jessup. We couldn't defeat him, Calum said shamefully. What? There are over 60 of you, but you couldn't even defeat a single guy? Fergus was dumbfounded. Lacey froze in shock too. They had gotten everything ready. All they needed was for Calum to bring the 4 people over, but he failed to do so. You're all useless. You couldn't even capture 4 people. What's the point of keeping you around? Lacey shrieked. Chapter 660 Hunted Down. Please have mercy, Mrs. Jessup, Calum hastily pleaded. He was too powerful. He has to be at least a peaked Tier 3 expert. We tried our best, but we couldn't overpower him. There was nothing we could do. How can he be as good as you claim? He's not a god. There were over 60 of you. You should have been able to catch him. Doesn't that prove how useless you all are? Lacey screamed in rage. She didn't know what being a Tier 3 expert implied. Even though he's not a god, he's formidable. I couldn't stand a chance against him. He's far more powerful than I am, Calum said helplessly. That's right, Mrs. Jessup. We all did our best. We couldn't even do anything to him, one of the men called out. We underestimated him. That's why we lost. I'm sure we can catch him if we send more people this time, another one said. After seeing how badly injured all the men were, Fergus and Lacey believed they did try their best. Fergus had been so sure that 60 people would have been enough to catch Tom and the others, but he'd been proven wrong. "Who on earth is he? Why is he so strong?" Fergus asked. "We've got no idea," Calum replied. "So what if he's good in a fight? Can he dodge bullets?" Lacey snorted. "Do you have an idea, dear?" Fergus asked. "Send more people over and get them to bring guns this time." "Just shoot that bastard!" Lacey growled through gritted teeth. "We can't do that. If we use guns, we'll catch other people's attention. And we'll be exposed," Fergus said. "So what? Don't forget who my father is. We can do whatever we want in Turin. No one will dare to investigate us. As long as we do a good job cleaning up the bodies, no one will hold us accountable for a few deaths. Blake still needs an eye donor. Are you willing to let him live with a blind eye?" "Alright, I'll get Celian to go over with some of his men," Fergus said. "Make sure they don't kill him, or else his eyeballs will be wasted," Lacey reminded. "I'll tell them," Fergus said with a nod. He immediately called Celian Hewitt and told the latter to catch Sherry and the others after giving him Sherry's address. Celian was an infamous criminal boss in Turin. He had a lot of men working for him. All along, Celian and the Jessups maintained a close relationship, and they often worked together. Right after getting the call, Celian led his men to Sherry's place. Meanwhile, Fergus turned to Kent and said apologetically, "I'm so sorry, a small issue came up, and the eye donor hasn't been brought over yet." "How much longer is it going to take?" Kent asked. His patience was at its limit. "Not long. We'll have him here in just an hour," Fergus assured. "Fine. I'll wait," Kent replied. He knew the Jessups weren't nobodies, so he dared not be too disrespectful. "My leg's broken, Mr. Jessup. Can the doctor treat me too?" Calum asked. Fergus nodded in agreement. Since Calum got injured while carrying out his job, it was only right for the Jessups to handle his treatment. "Mr. Vega, can you tend to one of my men first?" Fergus asked. "Sure, but it'll cost extra," Kent said. "That's no problem at all." "How much do you want?" Fergus asked. "Let's go with $80,000, Kent replied. He didn't want to ask for too much. In any case, he had nothing to do right now, so what was the harm in earning a bit extra? "Sure, I'll transfer the money to you right away." Fergus swiftly made the bank transfer. 40 minutes later, Celian and his men arrived at Sherry's place, only to find it deserted. He immediately called Fergus to report this. When Fergus saw the incoming call from Celian, he swiftly took it and asked, "Have you caught them?" "We just got to the place, Mr. Jessup, but there's no one here," Celian reported. "That's impossible." "Are you sure you found the right house?" Fergus asked. "Yes. It's the correct house. Maybe they ran off because they knew you'd come after them," Celian suggested. Fergus thought that had to be the case. "Why aren't you doing anything then? Go after them. Make sure they don't escape. You have to bring them to me no matter what," Fergus instructed. "Got it. I'll have my men search for them," Celian said. Once the call ended, Lacey quickly asked, "What's going on?" "They've gone on the run," Fergus replied. "We can't let them get away. We must catch them," Lacey growled viciously. "I've told Celian to catch them no matter what," Fergus said. "We can't just rely on Celian. We need to take action too. What are we going to do about Blake's eye if they escape?" Lacey was frantic. "What should we do then?" Fergus asked. "They probably want to leave Turin, but it's in the middle of the night right now. There aren't any buses leaving the city, so they'll have to wait at the bus station. They can only leave in the morning," Lacey deduced. "I got it. I'll tell our people to keep an eye on the station and catch them the moment they show up," Fergus said. "Don't forget that he knows how to fight. Tell your men to bring guns with them," Lacey reminded. "Also, tell them to be careful. Avoid using the guns if they can. All they need to do is catch the 4 of them. It'd be best if they can catch those 4 before they get to the station." What they were doing wasn't something that could see the light of the day. They couldn't let anyone find out about it, otherwise Jerry wouldn't be able to save them either. Wasting no time, Fergus quickly called Celian and instructed him to barricade the road as well as assign some men to stand guard at the station. Once that was done, Fergus also sent some of his people to hunt down Sherry and the others. Tom and the others were rushing to the bus station when they saw a group of burly men abruptly appearing on the road. Most alarmingly, the men were holding firearms. "Oh no! They have guns! The Jessups must have sent them!" Tom exclaimed the moment he saw the men. The women also became extremely nervous when they saw the men blocking up the road.